Hey, you down there in the streets, gridlocked New York City. I have commandeered one of your electronic billboards to impart to you some knowledge that is not taught to you in school. And it's the truth that sets you free, as my Lord and Saviour, and yours if you receive Him, declared that it would. No, okay, not really. But obviously, and this is not an April Fool's joke, although this is known as April Fool's Day. But I really will have to look into that, the origins of that. There must be something far more deeper than this idea of playing pranks on people and fooling people. There must be, whether it's an occult thing or I don't know, or just a tradition of men which Jesus said not to follow. Anyway, I mean, we're told that today is the day that our Lord and Saviour rose, but because of man's meddling with times and laws, thanks to Satan's influence, changing of calendars and as far as I know, or as far as I believe, is that God established the lunar calendar because it was in line with harvest, and as He is the giver of all good gifts, and we need the fruits of the earth to sustain our lives, it would make sense to have a time and date system based on that need. Anyway, this is for all YouTubers. You're welcome. You will find this presentation in the True Education playlist, and the title of it will be Where They Teach Us to Be Thick, and that was a line from a song by The Clash written by Joe Strummer, who I believe was quite well educated, but sadly he was influenced by political doctrines and dogmas, and yes, he was, I think he tried to champion the underdog and make people aware of the political chicanery in this world. But yeah, so today's subject is going to be about education, and is it really education? In other words, what was education formed for? Was it for the betterment of the masses? Was it so that they could communicate better? So they could, not be swindled in the marketplace, because they would know, that 2 and 2 does make 4 and not 5. Or was it, as it has become, I believe, and especially now when we see what's going on in the education system, whether it's like Common Core in America or in my country, this idea of putting all kinds of things into children's minds at a very early age. I mean, sex education at the age of 5? I mean, come on, sex education should not come into play until puberty is reached. And rightly so, because that's when the hormones are changing, and they're discovering new things about their body that didn't even cross their mind before. I mean, we're taking away children's childhood now. It's so sad. And it's indicative when you think like that Toys R Us has closed down now. Excuse me, itching nose. So I can see it in the end. Toys will no longer be a physical thing. It'll just be all digital, and I think that video games, and I believe that VR is really going to be pushed this year. This is going to be the year of VR. They really want to get everyone, in their own little surreal virtual world, to escape from the horrors of this reality that we are in, which is obviously, created by design by, the few, the chosen few, so to speak. But I don't want to rant on too much about those aspects. I just want to get into this and as I say, you know, the question is, what is education for? You know, I think when I show you the history, that you will realise that the idea of education of the masses was initially for two key reasons. It was in order to have them equipped with the skills to be workers in the factories, and also make them useful as cannon fodder in the army, as soldiers, because obviously you need to be able to understand and follow orders. So, you know, you need to, you know, have an understanding of what words mean, and, you know, communication, etc. You know, because remember that illiterate people, you know, have problems communicating. You know, so they wouldn't understand if they were given certain orders. So without further ado, let's get into this. So really, education, first and foremost, you know, what was designed to bring in social engineering. Yeah, do you understand what the term social engineering means? It means, by a form of indoctrination, getting so-called society, the masses, to think a certain way and act a certain way. You know, with a, you know, an illusion of freedom, an illusion of freedom of thought, an illusion of freedom of speech, which we're seeing is being eroded more and more now on a daily basis, and an illusion of freedom per se in every aspect. You know, we don't have the freedom to travel where we would like to go. You know, we have to get permission to do that, you know, visas, etc., border control, and, you know, and because of political machinations, you know, yes, they are necessary now, because through political indoctrination, you know, people are prepared to, you know, creep into other countries and wreak havoc. So, you know, this was all designed. So anyway, so let us begin. So it all began in 1788, when the Comte de Mirabeau declared that Prussia was an appropriate place for a potential revolution led by the German Illuminists. While a terrorist-type revolution erupted in Paris in 1789, revolutionary social engineering ideas spawned in Prussia. German rulers and innovative civil servants made numerous changes. They introduced religious tolerance and improved the conditions of the poor. Despite these improvements, enlightened despots withheld political freedoms and refused to restrain their political powers. Representative government to address the needs of the masses was obviously absent. The noblemen owned Prussia's great estates, and the commoners were subordinates. Britain's enlightened despots demanded absolute respect and obedience, bordering on reverence, from their subjects. In 1791, Wilhelm von Humboldt, of 1767 to 1835, wrote a book called On the Limits of State Action, in defense of the Enlightenment. Friedrich Schiller, who had close Illuminati associations, influenced Humboldt, and they maintained an ongoing correspondence. Wilhelm and Alexander von Humboldt, his brother, were educated at Göttingen, a haven for Illuminati recruitment. Wilhelm helped shape the new morality through the educational systems of a new Europe after the French Revolution. Alexander, later the Grand Master of the Society of Natural Scientists, travelled throughout the world and guided natural science into new paths. Wilhelm Humboldt endorsed Count Mirabeau's state-managed education policies, all without parental interference. Mirabeau, a member of the Society of 30 and instrumental in the Jewish emancipation, now supported the emancipation of children from their parents. In his book, Discourse on National Education, he wrote, "Education will be good to the extent that it suffers no outside intervention. it will be all the more effective, the greater the latitude left to the diligence of the teachers and the emulation of their pupils. Thus, Humboldt asked the state to, quote, safeguard the rights of children against their parents, so that, quote, parental authority does not exceed normal bounds. The Prussian monarchy expected strict obedience from citizens. Rhetoric about individual rights and a reformed legal code only increased the authoritarian power of the state, enforced by the military. During the 18th century, Karl Abraham Führer von Zedlitz, Prussian reformer and Minister of Justice, attempted to replace the local control of education with a centralized, uniform state system. Zedlitz and Moses Mendelssohn were colleagues. The state tried to seize control of local education using the 1794 Prussian General Land Law, wherein all schools and universities automatically became state institutions. In 1782, Swiss-born Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi of 1746 to 1827, a member of the Helvetian Society, who the Illuminati initiated into their ranks with the codename of Alfred, after the Anglo-Saxon king, known for restoring learning and education. Pestalozzi, considered the father of modern education, was one of several educators who joined the order. Weishaupt sought individuals who would develop educational reforms designed in conformance with his Illuminati objectives. In 1783, Pestalozzi co-founded the Zurich branch of the order, and co-founded with Johann Heinrich Rahn a society for intellectuals, actually an Illuminati front. After evaluating other schools and meetings, Friedrich Gottlieb Klopstock, Johann Wolfgang Goethe, Christoph Martin Wieland, and Johann Gottfried Herder in Leipzig in 1792. And Pestalozzi formulated his own teaching methods. So sometimes this book is a bit confusing the way it's been written. He established a school in 1799, and in 1801 wrote a book called How Gertrude Teaches Her Children, describing his methods. Shortly, almost 200 books advocated his teaching techniques. In 1805, he moved to Yverdon, set up a school, and taught there until 1825. His students included Hippolyte Leon, Denisard Rivel, Charles Baden, Johann Friedrich Herbart, a student at Göttingen from 1801 to 1809, Johannes Ramsauer, Delbruck, Blockmann, Karl Ritter, and Friedrich Froebel, who all became educators and promoted his methods. Pestalozzi frequently employed Ramsauer as his private secretary and worked him from early morning until night. He certainly exposed his students to numerous Illuminati policies, whether they later affiliated with the society or not. Many internationally prominent people visited the Pestalozzi school in Switzerland and praised his methods, including Wilhelm von Humboldt and Johann Gottlieb Fichte, allegedly a member of the Illuminati. Charles Maurice de Talleyrand Perigord, known as Talleyrand, Count Ioannis Antonios Kapostrias, Frederick Wilhelm III of 1770 to 1840, and Alexander I of Russia, and Anne-Louise Germaine d'Istel were all interested in his educational reforms. Napoleon crushed Frederick Wilhelm III's Prussian army despite the best efforts of the Hessian soldiers. France's nationalistic mentality and a better developed strategy won the Battle of Jena on October 14, 1806. French soldiers outmaneuvered the Prussian professionals, who were slower to comprehend and react to the situation and had a weaker command structure. Johann Gottlieb Fichte wrote his book Addresses to the German Nation to arouse the Germans during Napoleon's French occupation of 1807. He described the pathetic state of education and claimed it contributed to their defeat. He laid out a state-sponsored educational program. His addresses prompted Prussian officials to adopt Pestalozzi's teaching system, which did not jeopardize the elite class structure. Fichte used Pestalozzi's ideas as the entire basis for German national education. Author John Taylor Gatto, with reference to Fick's tome, said, "Children would have to be disciplined through a new form of universal conditioning. They could no longer be trusted to their parents. Look what Napoleon had done by banishing sentiment in the interest of nationalism. The teachers would advocate and thereby institutionalize a disproportionate devotion to the state." Prussia initiated a so-called free compulsory education for the primary grades, an 8-year course of study for all children between 5 and 13, which provided the rudimentary skills required for a developing industrialized world: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Students also received strict instruction in ethics, duty, discipline, and obedience. Affluent parents sent their children to private preparatory schools for 4 additional years, whereas the general population lacked the opportunity for a secondary education. The Prussian oligarchy inculcated social obedience through indoctrination so that every citizen viewed their leaders as consistently making correct decisions. The teachers taught the young men to have an undeviating loyalty to the government in preparation for military service. Fichte said, "The schools must fashion the person, and fashion him in such a way that he simply cannot or will otherwise than what you wish him to will." Prussian officials, after the military defeat at Jena, were motivated to reorganize their school systems to educate both the rich and poor, intellectually and morally. Beginning on February 28, 1809, Humboldt headed the Culture and Education Department at the Ministry of the Interior. He intended, through education, to elevate the state. In 1808, Johann Heinrich Ludwig Nicolaus and Johann Wilhelm Subern of the Prussian Educational Administration awarded scholarships to young teachers to study Pestalozzi's methods in Yverdon. Thereafter, they used and disseminated his academic ideas as the heads of teacher training seminaries or staff members of such institutions. On March 25, 1809, Humboldt wrote to his superiors and pledged to give Pestalozzi's method his undivided support. In 1810, the Prussian government founded the Humboldt Universität in Berlin, or University of Berlin, an immediate haven of radical intellectualism. In the early 1800s, US politicians and educators were impressed with the paternalistic educational system designed to produce obedient, subservient citizens. Their superiors sent young Harvard professors, particularly Unitarians, to the University of Göttingen and Berlin to study religious liberalism and secular scholarship. Numerous future US politicians studied at Göttingen. Edward Everett went there in 1815. George Ticknor, George Bancroft, and Joseph G. Cogswell followed. John Lothrop Motley studied there from 1831 to 33 and at the University of Berlin. US students attended these universities in a steady stream over the next century. Lionel Nathan de Rothschild went to Göttingen. Morley, a Harvard graduate, reportedly became good friends with Otto von Bismarck, a 33rd degree Freemason, at Göttingen. Motley was a member of the Institut de France, created on October 25, 1795 by former members of the Masonic Lodge Les Neuf Suresland, fashioned after the Masonic-based Royal Society of London. Motley defended and gave sustenance to Lincoln's war fervor and advocated Lincoln's drive towards statism. In 1810, Humboldt hired Christoph Wilhelm Friedrich Hufferland as chair of, quote, special pathology and therapy, and as the first dean of medicine at the University of Berlin. Hufferland participated in the planning of the new medical faculty. He had attended Göttingen, where he studied clinical medicine under Gottlieb Richter, who advocated smallpox vaccines despite the death rate resulting from the inoculations. He treated and befriended Wieland, Herder, Goethe, and Friedrich Schiller, all of whom had close Illuminati connections. Hofferland joined the order following his introduction to Freemasonry at Göttingen in 1783. He worked with Adolf Nigg and Adam Weishaupt. He promoted education reform and pediatrics as a special field of medicine. He wrote a book called Good Advice for Mothers in 1799 and another one in 1836 called Medical Handbook. Friedrich Froebel, a Pestalozzi student who also studied at Göttingen, established the first kindergarten in Prussia on June 28, 1840. Margarete Meyer and her sister Bertha, daughters of Heinrich Meyer, a prosperous Jewish merchant, attended Froebel's lectures beginning in 1849. Bertha spent 2 years opening kindergartens in Prussia. After the 1848 revolution, many revolutionaries relocated to England and then to the US. Bertha introduced her sister to Karl Schurz, and they were soon married. In 1851, Bertha and her husband opened the England Infant Garden in Tavistock Place. Oh, surprise, surprise. And isn't that where the Tavistock Institute, that bastion of mind control, is established here? See how it all fits into place. She opened a kindergarten in Manchester in 1859 and one in Leeds in 1860. Karl and Margarete left for the US in 1854. Now I hope you understand that yes, you could argue and say, well, but this was a good thing, wasn't it? People getting educated, being pulled out of the illiterate swamp, etc. But see, this is the problem. You see, as it says, good intentions are spoilt by bad association. But not just that, how it says, isn't it? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Yeah. You see, they weren't really interested in emancipating the poor. They were more interested in indoctrinating them, get them to be good, loyal, subservient servants, yeah? Ready to follow out their political agendas. Carry out, yeah? You see what I'm trying to get across here to you? I hope you do. Margarete Schurz opened the first kindergarten in the US in Watertown, Wisconsin. Yale-educated Henry Barnard visited Bertha Rome, Schurz's sister, in London in 1854, and then began promoting her Froebel-based kindergarten philosophy through lectures. He implemented the kindergarten program when he became the first US Commissioner of Education from 1867 to 1870. He worked with Horace Mann, a Freemason, and another individual who influenced US education. Elizabeth Peabody, a devotee of Goethe and Hegel, heard a lecture, met Margarete Schurz, and soon started a kindergarten in Boston, which influenced the development of kindergartens in New England. The Dwight family of Yale University funded Mann, who advocated mandatory school, and once remarked, "School is the cheapest police." Mann promoted his ideas to the Boston School Committee. Others shared his sentiments regarding compulsory education, including people with such prominent names as Sears, Pierce, Harris, Stowe, and Lancaster, all involved in creating universal school systems for the industrial powers. Edward Everett, a Boston native, studied theology after graduating from Harvard in 1811. He was ordained the pastor of Boston's Brattle Street Unitarian Church in 1814. He soon left and joined Harvard staff, where he had a special arrangement to travel to Europe for additional training before beginning his Harvard teaching assignment. He reportedly studied 12 to 14 hours a day at the University of Göttingen and the Illuminati breeding ground, where he received a PhD in 1817, the first American to receive that honor. Eventually, 10,000 of America's wealthiest families sent their sons to obtain PhD degrees in Prussian universities. John Pierpont Morgan, Sr., studied at Göttingen beginning in 1856. Globalists, like Morgan, use both the left and the right dialectic. They fund both sides, often at the same time. In 1818, Robert Owen, the acknowledged father of English socialism, visited Pestalozzi and advocated his methods in Britain and the US. William McClute, a wealthy Philadelphia scientist who had emigrated to the US in 1796, endorsed Pestalozzi's methods. Owen enlisted McClure's assistance in perpetuating his teaching methods in the US. McClure's protege, Marie Fratigeau, opened a school in Philadelphia. McClure offered to pay all of Pestalozzi's expenses to emigrate to America to establish his school system, but Pestalozzi felt he was too old and did not speak English, so he rejected the offer. But, at McClure's urging, Joseph Neff, born Neff, a Pestalozzian teacher in Paris, came to the US in 1806. and established schools in Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio. Neef also participated in Owen's communitarian experiment at New Harmony. In 1808, Neef published a book called Sketch of a Plan and Method of Education, the first American manual on the system of industrial education. In 1819, John Griscom wrote a book called A Year in Europe, which received praise from Thomas Jefferson and other intellectuals. Griscom applauded the Prussian system. William Woodbridge wrote letters to the American Journal of Education in which he praised Pestalozzi for his teaching methods. Henry Dwight wrote his book Travels in North Germany in 1825, which praised the new Prussian teacher seminaries where prospective teachers, quote, were screened for correct attitudes towards the state. In 1830, the French government sent Victor Cousin to study Prussia's educational system. He had previously lived in Germany, had studied German philosophy, and was friends with George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel and Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph Schelling. In 1832, he published a 2-volume report which was readily accepted. In 1834, individuals translated the portion pertaining to the Prussian primary schools into English and titled it A Report on the State of Public Instruction in Prussia. The US educator, J. Orville Taylor, said, "The volume should be welcomed by every American citizen." Thereafter, editors republished the report in New York in 1835 with a preface by Taylor. Taylor admitted that part of the system was incompatible to, quote, the spirit and feelings of the American people, or, quote, their form of government, but still gave a glowing recommendation despite those issues. He did not feel that the foundational political differences between Prussia and the US should, quote, prevent Americans from benefiting by the example set by Prussia. Cousin wrote, "The fact that the Prussian government is an absolute government in no way vitiates the value of the excellent law on education adopted in 1819. The US abandoned national rivalries and cultural differences and systematically and gradually imposed an educational system designed to develop an acquiescent, uncomplaining citizen." By the early 1800s, Ohio was wealthy and progressive. Ohio citizens had already considered establishing a public school system. In December of 1837, Calvin E. Stowe, husband of Harriet Stowe, and professor at Cincinnati's Lane Theological Seminary, spoke before the Convention of Teachers at Columbus. He promoted Cousin's ideas and advocated their acceptance, not only in Ohio, but also in America. Individuals published his speech under the title The Prussian System of Public Instruction and Its Applicability to the United States, with an introduction, which stated, "The truth brought out by Professor Stowe shall rescue this nation from the reproachful superiority of the monarchies and despotisms of Europe, and secure to our republic the triumphs of universal education." Stowe claimed, quote, that the enlightened and patriotic citizens of Ohio and other western states should benefit from Prussia's experience. Stowe's report was printed and distributed to every school district in Ohio under the direction of the legislature. Stowe was more interested in Prussia's primary schools rather than the secondary schools, inaccessible to most students. Individuals reprinted his report in Boston under the direction of the Massachusetts House of Representatives and in New York, Pennsylvania, and several other states. Many individuals embraced the Prussian system. William Pierce, a Unitarian minister living near Rochester, New York, hurriedly left his ministry during the anti-Masonic commotion prior to the first Jackson election. His critics claimed he had concealed an Illuminati lodge within his church. He took all of his Illuminati paraphernalia and headed to Michigan, where he soon organized the first state superintendency of education, modeled after the Prussian system. Stowe advised, "Changes must be made slowly. The people must be prepared and educated for these changes. But the public men of Ohio have shown their readiness to further this good work." Ohio's governor, Joseph Vance, from 1836 to 1838, a top-level Freemason, promoted Prussia's school system to the state legislature. Two Freemen preceded Vance as governor of Ohio, Duncan MacArthur from 1830 to 1832, and Robert Lucas from 1832 to 1836. The Prussian system instituted compulsory attendance, student testing, classification for job placement, a national controlled curriculum, and a mandatory kindergarten. In 1819, Everett began teaching at Harvard and editing the North American Review, founded in Boston in 1815, the nation's leading literary magazine. By 1818, the magazine focused on issues such as improving society and enhancing the culture. It advocated the improvement of education, especially reforms within the secondary schools. Additionally, the magazine emphasized that well-educated experts should manage the U.S. government. Contributors included numerous New Englanders: John Adams, George Bancroft, Nathaniel Bowditch, William Cullen Bryant, Lewis Cass, Edward T. Channing, Caleb Cushing, Henry Dana Sr., Alexander Hill Everett and his brother Edward Everett, Jared Sparks, and George Ticknor. Citizens elected Everett to the U.S. House of Representatives from 1825 to 1835. He returned to Massachusetts in 1836. Citizens then elected him as governor, where he made significant changes in education. Everett, as governor, implemented the Prussian education system. He sought to transform Massachusetts into a public education laboratory. He created a state board of education to scrutinize schools and advocated the creation of schools to train teachers. He signed a law making it mandatory for all children under the age of 15 to attend 3 months of day school. Everett returned to Harvard as a professor and university president from 1846 to 1849. He resigned from Harvard and became a confidential advisor to Secretary of State Daniel Webster. In October of 1850, he drafted the Postman Note for Webster to present to the Chargé d'Affaires in Washington, D.C. in defense of President Taylor, sending an agent to observe the activities of the Hungarian revolutionaries. There was a huge influx of poor Irish Catholics into Massachusetts due to Ireland's famine. In 1852, with Horace Mann's support, Everett fully adopted the Prussian education system in Massachusetts. Shortly thereafter, New York's governor instituted the system in 12 New York schools on a trial basis. Equality, as the founders viewed it, was not a government guarantee of equality of outcome, but rather political equality. Social and economic inequality within a free market society is a natural outcome of ability and effort. The Marxists want mandatory equality, a very attractive option for the less fortunate. However, collectivist systems operate to enrich the rich and further impoverish the poor. With the exception of Robert Owen from 1771 to 1858, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels did not have a high opinion of utopian socialists. Owen, a native of Wales, funded individual powers into a social and cultural collective power through the total reorganization of the family structure. Engels found Owen's proposals as, quote, the most practical and most fully worked out. The alternative version of the theory, quote, from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs, reads as equal obligation to labor, equal right in the product. Engels described this rule, in a reference to Owen, as one feature of, quote, the most clear-cut communism possible. Morris Hillquit, a founder and leader of the Socialist Party of America and leading labor lawyer in New York City, in speaking of Owen said, he now arrived at the ultimate and logical deduction from that theory that an equal degree of morality and happiness presupposes equality in all material conditions of life. Owen had developed from a mere philanthropist into a full-fledged communist. Socialism and communism are effective vehicles for gradually imposing the dictatorial Illuminati agenda. Author Robert Freeman, referring to the Enlightenment often associated with the Illuminati, wrote, "We must win the common people in every corner. This will be obtained chiefly by means of the schools, and by open, hearty behavior, show, condensation, popularity, and toleration of their prejudices, which we shall at leisure root out and dispel." The Enlightenment influenced three middle-class utopians, the Comte Henri de Saint-Simon, Francois Fourier, and Robert Owen. They viewed their mission as the universal enlightenment of humankind. Robert Owen settled in Manchester, England in 1787, where he worked for a wholesale draper. The word draper is an obsolete term for a wholesaler or retailer of cloth, mainly for clothing. While English writers and scholars focused on the French Revolution, He concentrated on the industrial transformation in Manchester and devised a plan to implement societal change by non-aggressive, more subtle tactics than the forceful tactics that the people behind the Paris mobs staged. By 1793, Owen was prominent in the growing textile industry and had numerous local connections therein. He attended his first meeting of the Manchester Literary and Philosophical Society on October the 4th, 1793. The society, possibly an Illuminati front, was popular with Manchester's textile industrialists. Owen presented at least 4 papers before the society, one on improvements in the cotton trade, the business that Nathan Rothschild would engage in when he moved to Manchester a few years later. Owen and Thomas Walker, a leading cotton merchant and political reformer, were both members of an elite steering committee for the Manchester Literary and Philosophical Society. By the time Owen began attending society meetings, Thomas Cooper, the future South Carolina secessionist agitator, was getting ready to go to America. However, for a short period they knew each other and might have shared similar views. Owen, a utopian socialist, developed his ideas of a, quote, new view of society and a theoretical framework for education, which he introduced at New Lanark after taking over the management of the Scottish Mills in January of 1800. New Lanark was about 1¼ miles from Lanark in South Lanarkshire, in Scotland. In 1795, Mayor Amschel Rothschild hired a French citizen, Seligman Geisenheimer, as, quote, who was quoted known as an Enlightenment Jew, as his chief bookkeeper. He spoke 5 languages fluently, was a Freemason and a disciple of the philosophies of Moses Mendelssohn, the father of European communism, and Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi of 1746 to 1827, a member of the Illuminati and the architect of modern education. Mayor Rothschild's father hoped that his son would be a rabbi, but Mayer, though he was devoted to the Talmud, chose to be a merchant and money changer. Mayer and his son Solomon, initiated in Freemason on June 14, 1809, had membership in the illuminated Frankfurt Juden Lodge, along with other local Jews with the surnames of Adler, Speyer, Reiss, Seikel, Ellison, Hanau, Goldschmidt, and Geisenheimer. Rothschild's new chief bookkeeper. One of the lodge's founders, in addition to Geisenheimer, was Isaac Hildesheim, a merchant in English textiles. James Mayer Rothschild, of the Paris branch of the banking family, was a 33rd degree Freemason, allied with the French Supreme Council. Rothschild and his new bookkeeper, Geisenheimer, promoted public education, which would provide a uniform education for each student. Wealthy families enrolled their children in private schools outside of the ghetto, but poorer families relied on their own teaching abilities, augmented by a religious education under the direction of the local rabbi. Geisenheimer and Rothschild established the Philanthropin, a school for Jewish children, ostensibly to, quote, spread the love of mankind. Despite the appeal of free education, some parents opposed the idea of relinquishing their children to other people for instruction. Orthodox rabbis bitterly opposed this new educational approach. Rothschild and Geisenheimer modeled their scholastic program after Pestalozzi, a member of the Illuminati and the father of modern education. They also, quote, enlightened the children with the socialist ideas of Voltaire, known as François-Marie Arouet, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Gotthold Ephraim Lessing, Johann Gottfried von Herder, and Moses Mendelssohn. Mayer's eldest son financially supported the school throughout his life. Robert Owen, by now a wealthy Manchester industrialist, visited some of the best experimental schools. Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi of Yverdon, Switzerland, and Philipp Emanuel von Fellenberg at Hofwil, Switzerland. Owen sent his sons, Robert Dale and William, to Fellenberg, a Pestalozzi disciple. Several Swiss reformers and 2 American reformers, John Griscom and William McClure, visited Owen's community at New Lanark to view the results of his ideas. Owen published a book called A Statement Regarding the New Lanark Establishment in 1812. Nicholas I of 1796 to 1835, who ruled Russia from 1825 to 1855, sympathetic to the peasants, visited New Lanark to evaluate Owen's socialistic schemes. On August 27, 1806, Owen, with John Walker, his associate and translator, were bound for conference in Frankfurt and Aachen in North Westphalia, Germany, where he would present his socialistic community ideas to the European monarchs. Festivities began in Frankfurt with lavish dinners, conferences and receptions. On September 7, 1806, Owen met Friedrich von Gentz, a Freemason who facilitated the Frankfurt events at a dinner given by Bethmann Brothers Bank. Two brothers, Johann Philipp Bethmann and Simon Moritz Bethmann, established the Gebrüder Bethmann Bank, using an inheritance from their uncle who had raised them after the death of their father. Gentz, speaking for the banker, said, "We do not want the mass to become wealthy and independent of us. How could we govern them if they were?" Attendees included political representatives and bankers from Prussia, Austria and other independent German states. Participants included Prince Clemens Metternich, Karl August von Hardenberg, Yanis Kapodistrias, and bankers John Parrish, Simon Moritz von Bethmann and Mayer A. Rothschild, who may have already embraced Illuminism and was promoted an equal education by means of a public school, as advocated by Pestalozzi. Rothschild attended Owen's presentation to hear his ideas about societal change. Owen had sufficient copies of his philosophical work, New View of Society, published in German, French and English. His objectives were to present, quote, "the most important truth for man to know in order that nations might be peacefully reformed and united under the new system." In Frankfurt, he was more moderate than in previous presentations. He did not attack religion, priests, marriage, private property or lawyers, but elaborated on the production advantages of the new, quote, "mechanical power," the industrial age technology, a conduit to further riches, for the wealthy, of course. The existing capitalist system, which increased production and unequal distribution, limits benefits which create social unrest. Consequently, he advocated a system of shared equality. However, instead of revolution, certain prominent individuals could subtly persuade the people. They could impose communism without force. Owen stressed the importance of early preschool, kindergarten, even infant education. He used Pestalozzi's methods in his Institute for the Formation of Character, established in New Lanark on January 1, 1816. He believed that children should be well adjusted and happy, which, according to him, meant docile, a word that recurs in much of his writing. Part of Owen's utopian philosophy incorporated Pestalozzi's system of education. His son, Robert Dale Owen, wrote a book called Outline of the System of Education at New Lanark in 1824. Owen, even as optimistic as he was, recognized that a community of equality based on lofty and liberal principles could only emerge after years of educational training in the principle of the New World Order. Owen claimed that skilled teachers could gradually wean students away from, quote, "the errors and prejudices that existed since the time of Adam." People would have to abandon the ideas and associations of the selfish individual system before they could participate in a community like his. Owen, in an effort to bring his socialism to the US, paid $132,000 for land and $50,000 for livestock, tools and merchandise for his New Harmony, Indiana project. He gave a speech before the US Congress explaining this new way of life, where people could live and work together without the normal human foibles and exploitations. About 1,000 people joined him at New Harmony on the Wabash River. Author and poet Carl Sandburg of 1878 to 1967, an advocate of the Owen community and one of Lincoln's most effective sanitizing biographers, wrote in his book Abe Lincoln, The Prairie Years, that when Lincoln heard about the New Harmony project, his heart lit up. Author Al Benson Jr. points out that Sandburg failed to mention that Owen was an avid socialist and that the group in New Harmony was practicing socialism. Sandburg was married to schoolteacher Lillian Steichen, also an ardent socialist. Carl Sandburg was a secretary from 1910 to 1912 to Milwaukee's socialist mayor, Emil Seidel, the first socialist mayor of a major city. Sandburg campaigned for presidential candidate Eugene V. Debs during one of the many times that Debs ran for the US presidency. Therefore, given Sandburg's own socialist sympathies, there was good reason for him to omit all information about, quote, the great emancipator's prodigious socialist tendencies and policies. Sandberg produced a 6-volume biography on Lincoln. Robert Owen gave a speech in New Harmony on July 4, 1826, in which he referred to the American Revolution as the first opportunity to use political power to attack, quote, the trinity of evils of private or individual property, absurd and irrational systems of religion and marriage founded on individual property combined with some of these irrational systems of religion. Ultimately, to appease the growing number of critics, he suggested that people adopt a universal, quote, rational religion founded on the idea that truth is nature and nature God, that God is truth and truth is God. During the 1820s and 1830s, Owen inspired the founding of approximately 19 cooperative colonies. In the 1840s, Albert Brisbane, Charles Fourier's US disciple, experienced the hopeful beginning and the discouraging ending of over 40 Fourierist phalanxes, a, quote, utopian community organized on proto-communist Fourierist principles. Socialist experiments flourished sporadically over a period of 40 years as an alternative to the problems of inequitable production and distribution resulting from monopoly capitalism. With every industrial crisis and the failure of trade unions to make material differences, people sought a solution. After Lincoln's War, labour conditions and living standards for farmers and workers declined. The order out of chaos advocates were simply moving the US populace closer to socialism without mentioning the consequences. Socialism, then and now, appeals to workers who are struggling to maintain their families and households during economic depressions. Friedrich Engels, 1820 to 1895, Engels' father, a German textile manufacturer, sent his son to Manchester in 1842 to learn business management in his father's factory. Ehrman and Engels. Manchester was a part of Lancashire, the textile centre of England. On November 16, 1842, on his way to England, Engels stopped at the Rheinische Zeitung, founded in January 1, 1842, to meet Karl Heinrich Marx for the first time. Both Marx and Engels were children of privilege who devised a pattern to implement socialism despite human will. Because of Engels' observations over the next 2 years, he wrote a book called The Conditions of the Working Class in England in 1844. Engels, who had studied Hegel's philosophy, associated with trade unionists, Chartists and socialists, including Robert Owen's followers. Engels met Owen and wrote articles for his newspaper called The New Moral World. Engels and Marx both studied Weishaupt and Illuminism. Engels described Owen as, quote, a man of almost sublime, childlike character, one of the few born leaders of men. He also added, every social movement and real advance in England on behalf of the workers links with the name of Robert Owen. The Owenites had a significant presence in Manchester. By 1850, they built the Hall of Science at Campfield at a cost of £7,000, where socialists presented lectures on a regular basis. Robert Dale Owen, son of Robert Owen, emigrated to the US and ultimately settled in New York City and established his own Hall of Science in a ramshackle old church in New York City on April 1829. He advocated his father's ideas in the US, supported Susan B. Anthony, and associated with British Illuminist Frances Fanny Wright, an avowed atheist who had arrived in the US in 1818 and promoted her philosophies throughout the country from 1820 to 1835. Owen wrote his book Moral Physiology, the first book in the US to advocate birth control via coitus interruptus. He and Wright conducted a series of lectures on social reform at the Hall of Science. They collaborated with two brothers, George Henry and Frederick W. Evans, who arrived in New York in 1820 from Britain. Together they published a book called Working Men's Advocate and also the Daily Sentinel and Young America, all of which were very popular. Young America promoted, quote, equal rights for women with men in all respects and, quote, abolition of chattel slavery and of wages slavery. They began promoting equal rights for women in 1825, which became part of Ezekiel Williams' platform when he ran for governor. Wright and Owen co-edited the newspaper Free Inquirer in New York City. In 1829, Wright was the featured speaker at a secret Illuminati meeting in New York and addressed issues such as equal rights, atheism, and free love.
She advocated the establishment of a women's auxiliary of the Illuminati. The speakers informed the attendees about the Illuminati's international movement, in which people who would know the proponents as communists. Their foundational philosophy was the fomentation of warfare and chaos to induce the masses to accept a one-world government. People would be so exhausted and demoralized by revolution that when the Illuminati promised peace, people would embrace the idea of regulated order. Sound familiar? Robert Dale Owen was instrumental in the development of an early socialist labour movement and early women's movement. The socialist movement produced several influential writers who addressed economic issues. Langdon Bilsby of 1789 to 1871 wrote Observations of the Sources and Effects of Unequal Wealth, which he published in New York in 1826. Thomas Skidmore wrote The Rights of Men to Property in 1829. Both writers were utopian socialists. Their analysis of the modern industrial system and the effects on labour clearly spelled out the concept of modern socialism. About 600 newspapers in various parts of the country endorsed these philosophies. Robert Dale Owen used the media publicly to evaluate himself into politics. He served in the Indiana House of Representatives twice, 1835 to 1838 and 1851 to 1853. Residents elected him to Congress from 1842 to 1847, during which time he drafted the legislation to establish the Smithsonian Institute in Washington. As a member of the Indiana Constitutional Convention, he was instrumental in enacting the provisions for women's rights and initiated the free school system in Indiana. Horace Greeley arrived in New York in 1831. He and Langdon Bilsby promoted the Owenite socialistic community system. Greeley, in his lecture, Social Architects, and Bilsby's Sources and Effects of Unequal Wealth, both advocated Robert Owen's economic views. Greeley knew him. In 1848, the elderly Owen went to Paris during the 1848 revolution to assist Louis Blanc and others in the development of political socialism. A few weeks prior to his death, he attended the convention of the Social Science Association in Liverpool. In 1851, Greeley celebrated Owen's 80th birthday with him and other friends at the Colborne Hotel in London. Owen was a devout socialist until he died on November 17, 1858. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. I mean, if you want to learn more, I mean, I can, you know, I will give it in a part 2. So I'm hoping there's going to be a, how you say, a positive response to this, and that there will be good debate, comments, and as I always tell people, don't take my word for it. The truth is out there if you wish to find it. Everything that I presented to you here you know, there are sources, it can be found, you know, there is documented evidence, etc. So it's up to you whether you know, want to be a Berean and seek the truth of the matter, or as the Bible says, be willfully ignorant and choose to follow lies. Your choice. So before I go, I want to say thank you to my new subscriber, John Bond. Thank you for commenting. I hope that my comment back to you was received with grace, and I hope that you get to watch this and comment on it and tell me what you think. You know, this is what we need. We need healthy debate about, you know, how this world is being run, and you know, do we, as they want us to be acquiescent and just you know, just go with the flow, as they say. Like you can see these people in this video. You know, I mean, obviously we see stereotyping there because we've got the scooter, the BMX biker, and the skateboarder. You know, is that Sarah Connor there? Just gone by, didn't she? So I don't know whether this is an, you know, it would be I think it is an 80s thing, isn't it? Because isn't it 80s when it was the skateboard craze? You know, even actually, yeah, same with the sorry, that's not BMX, is it? Sorry, no, my mistake. That's actually trials bike, isn't it? Yeah, or in the game. What was it? N64, the Excite bike. You know. Yeah. Anyway, so I'll as and when I move to, and when I get the time, I'll be uploading another video. In fact, the next one is actually going to be about how media was formed and how it's used to manipulate us. So hopefully you're looking forward to that presentation. So on that note, I wish you all well, and I hope you're having a great day, and I hope to speak with you soon. So bye for now.